At first, it was just little things, strange looks, late-night whispers, the way her eyes followed me a second too long. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But now, every glance, every smile, every silent stare has turned into something far darker. This isn't love anymore. This is obsession. And tonight, you'll hear why my wife's watchful eyes have become pure horror. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been completely normal, and I had never noticed any strange behavior or red flags from her. I cannot emphasize enough how unusual all of this is for her. Lynn is kind, smart, and thoughtful. She has always been the type of person who doesn't joke around much. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she normally does. She doesn't even like horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so terrified she couldn't even get halfway through before we had to turn it off. She doesn't like anything scary and has never been into pranks. That just wasn't her cup of tea. And that's what makes this whole thing so strange. It's so unlike her. I should also add that she has never had any mental health issues, and as far as I know, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people can hide their struggles, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I would have noticed some kind of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. That morning, I was running a little late and knew I wouldn't have time to stop at Dunkin' Donuts for breakfast like I usually did. I took a sip of coffee as I hurried down the hallway toward the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead. I could only see her eyes and a lock of her long black hair spilling against the wall. The rest of her body was hidden. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. The hot liquid burned my lips. "Jesus, Lynn," I said, wiping drops of coffee off my pants. "You scared the hell out of me." She immediately darted out of sight like a child caught doing something wrong. I heard her quick footsteps running toward the living room, and by the time I reached the front door, she was gone. It was definitely strange and completely out of character for her, like I said. But I thought it was kind of funny that she was being more playful, less serious than usual. I called out that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was odd, sure, but nothing that screamed, "Call a priest." By lunchtime, I had already forgotten about it, and when I got home, she was completely normal. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she. Life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to grab a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, drinking straight from the carton of orange juice, when I got this strong feeling that I was being watched. For some reason, I looked down at the floor, and there was my wife's smiling face staring back at me. She was peeking at me from the other side of the kitchen island, eyes wide open and unblinking, grinning ear to ear, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it, not out of anger but pure fear. Something about it in that moment terrified me. When I screamed, Lynn scuttled backward out of sight, her hands and feet smacking against the tile as she scrambled on all fours out of the kitchen. I didn't chase after her, or even yell. I just stood there, frozen, wondering what in God's name had gotten into her. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but eventually I did. When I entered our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side in bed, asleep, or pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing, making sure she really was asleep. I half expected her to leap at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed in and she didn't stir. Her breathing was slow and steady, and I started to wonder if maybe I had dreamed the whole thing. The next morning, I waited until she came down for coffee. After handing her a cup and kissing her cheek, I decided to bring it up. "What was all that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. She frowned into her cup, shaking her head as if she had no idea what I was talking about. "You were peeking at me. From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor near the island. She followed my gaze, then turned back to me and burst out laughing. She laughed so hard, I couldn't help but laugh with her. "Sometimes you scare the crap out of me, you know that?" I said. She giggled, set down her mug, and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You always scare the crap out of me," she teased. "So I guess we're even." We said our goodbyes and went to work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been to see her grinning at me from behind the counter like that. The sound her hands made as she scrambled away. I told myself she was just being silly, just trying to share in my love for all things horror. It wasn't that I was afraid of her, it just didn't make sense. She started peeking more often after that. Sometimes she would peek out from behind the couch or the living room curtains. Once, she even managed to squeeze herself into my grandmother's old trunk at the foot of our bed. I wouldn't have known she was in there if the creaky hinges hadn't given her away. She had propped the lid open just enough for half her face to peer out. She was grinning like an excited toddler. It was unsettling. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why she was doing this. She didn't answer. She just slowly closed the lid, trapping herself in the trunk. I walked away, confused and uneasy. I didn't understand why she was doing this, but clearly it delighted her. I just hoped she would get bored of the game soon. For the next 2 weeks, Lynn didn't peek at me once. I started to think she had given up on her strange little prank, and I felt relieved. One night, while we were watching Netflix, I joked that I hadn't seen her spying on me lately and that she must have quit her little spy game. She glanced at me with a slight smile and said, "Maybe I just got better at it." I didn't respond, but I wondered if she was joking. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still spying on Mimi when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what on earth was she getting out of it? I started feeling paranoid, constantly checking corners and doorways to see if she was watching me. I was jumpy whenever she wasn't in my direct line of sight. I felt ridiculous and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without any more incidents, I finally relaxed. I stopped checking behind the furniture and the walls, telling myself it was just a bad memory. Then, a few days ago, everything got much, much worse. Lynn had left to go to a friend's house, and I was sprawled on the couch playing some games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I went to take a shower, and as I was rinsing the soap out of my hair, I had this horrible feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and nearly had a heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head poking into the shower, the rest of her body still outside. Her long black hair draped over the curtain, the ends dripping water. Her mouth hung open in a grotesque, toothy grin, and her eyes were wide and bloodshot, as if she hadn't blinked for a long time. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, and her smile didn't falter. Her makeup had streaked down her cheeks in 2 black lines. She looked both delighted and completely unhinged. I was terrified. We stayed like that for a moment, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly drew her head back out of the shower, and I could see her shadowy figure retreating toward the bathroom door through the curtain. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut hard enough to crack the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed in the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I was overreacting, some of you might think, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with this insanity anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced the bathroom, stopping every few minutes to listen at the door. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything else, but I imagined Lynn standing on the other side, giggling at her little game. I felt a surge of anger. I was furious at being frightened in my own home, at having to hide in the bathroom for over an hour. All for what? A prank? If this was a joke, it was a sick one. "What the hell, Lynn?" I snapped. This crap is getting really old. I waited for her to apologize or call me a jerk, but instead I heard a soft moan, so quiet I wasn't sure I'd actually heard it, then nothing. "Lynn?" I called, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. No response, just my own heavy breathing. "For God's sake, stop it!" I shouted, pounding my hand on the door. I waited for her to yell back at me, like I expected she would after me talking to her that way. I'd never yelled at her before, but nothing. Just the occasional drip of water from the shower head. I won't deny that I was terrified, too terrified to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes, time stretching into an eternity when you're scared. Finally, I decided I couldn't stay in the bathroom all night, so I knelt down and peeked through the crack under the door. I almost expected to see her face staring back, but thankfully I didn't. I stared down the hallway toward the top of the stairs. No Lynn. I didn't know whether to be relieved or more afraid. I kept watching for several minutes, waiting for her head to pop up over the top step, but it never did. I stood up, hand on the door, steeling myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with trembling fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me sick to remember. A moan, louder this time, but now I could tell where it came from. I turned my head toward the closet door in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife peeking out from the tiny gap. Her eyes were wide as ever, and her mouth was stretched in the most disgusting gum-bearing grin I've ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too horrified. Her hands were crossed over her chest, her body trembling with some kind of extreme excitement, as if she could barely contain herself. A short, raspy moan bubbled out of her throat, deep and raw, making my whole body shudder. Somehow, I found the strength to fling open the bathroom door and run down the stairs as fast as I could, grabbing my keys and phone off the living room table before bolting out to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but she didn't come any closer. I didn't even bother shutting the front door. I drove away faster than the law allows, shaking the entire time, unsure whether it was fear or cold or both. I hadn't grabbed a jacket or even shoes. I was still in my shorts, my hair still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring every call and text that came in. I didn't check my phone until I was parked safely in his driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a stream of messages, all asking where I'd gone and why I'd left like that. I angrily tossed my phone into the glove compartment, enraged at her apparent indifference. My brother and his wife were shocked to see me, especially in just a pair of shorts, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked what had happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but I didn't go into details. I didn't want him thinking I was overreacting, abandoning my wife over a prank, even a weird one. I mean, hadn't I been encouraging her for years to loosen up instead of being so serious all the time? I wanted her to relax, but this was definitely not what I had in mind. I tried to sleep on their couch, but my mind wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the whole time made my skin crawl. She'd never left that damn bathroom. Instead, she'd snuck into the closet and slammed the bathroom door to trick me. Just the thought of going back home made me anxious. I tossed and turned for hours. Chris finally gave me a sleeping pill so I could get some rest. My sleep was filled with nightmares, all of Lynn's grinning faces. I woke as the sun was rising. My body ached from the couch, and I felt exhausted. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say. I wasn't going back home unless she promised me she'd never pull anything creepy like that again. I just wanted my wife back. Her serious, normal self had never looked so good to me. I was about to call her and tell her that when the familiar feeling washed over me again, I was being watched. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart clenching. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored it, the worse it got. My eyes flicked from the ceiling, and there she was. Her face pressed against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool ran down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks on the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there for a while, maybe all night. I didn't even bother screaming, though fear was quickly giving way to anger. I shot up from the couch and slammed my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you insane? What the hell is wrong with you? Go home!" I shouted. "Right now!" She didn't move, and her horrible expression didn't change. If anything, her smile just grew wider, as if she'd never been more thrilled in her life. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could also hear them from her spot outside. Her head tilted slightly in their direction, and she slowly began to close her mouth. Chris called my name from upstairs, his voice anxious. I turned just in time to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the stairs. When I looked back at the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she had been there were the 2 streaks of drool still sliding down the glass. I tried to explain to Chris and Rebecca about waking up and seeing Lynn staring at me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot beneath the window, but there were no footprints in the soil, just a faint indentation. Probably an animal, Chris guessed, and I didn't want to argue. He and Rebecca seemed to think I had dreamed the whole thing, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called in sick to work that day and shut off my phone. I didn't want to deal with Lynn. Even talking to her felt like too much at that point. I was really starting to believe there was something wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, things would never go back to the way they were. The thought crushed me. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I realized I was ready to confront her, to give her one last chance to explain herself. After 6 years together, I told myself I could at least give her that. I switched my phone back on and saw dozens of messages she had sent, all written like a worried wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Come home. And more. Every message telling me she loved me, that she wanted me home, that she was worried sick. Not a single damn one mentioned the insane thing she had just done, as if she hadn't been acting like some character out of a Stephen King novel. Even her texts were off. She was the type to write a whole novel just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have a lot more to say after her bizarre antics. I know this might seem childish to some of you, sitting a million miles away from this situation. But if you saw the way Lynn looked at me, the way she crawled on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, I think you'd agree my reaction was justified. I ended up staying another night with Chris and Rebecca. Yesterday, I didn't wake up until afternoon, and thank God I didn't see Lynn's face staring at me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place. But do you think this fight is fixable? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both sandwiches for lunch, and I knew she was trying to broach the topic without sounding nosy. I don't know. She's like a different person, I said carefully. I wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the madness I'd been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the woman you married. Maybe you two just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be worked out, she said, like some kind of mediator. I don't think so anymore. I don't think talking will help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words hurt coming out. I missed my wife. I loved her. But how could I live with someone like this? Living in constant fear didn't sound appealing. Lynn loves you. She must be hurting too, she said. I'm not so sure about that, I replied. Well, she sure looks like it. I've never seen her so upset. Really unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to sink in. When they did, dread slithered under my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, like it wasn't a nightmare. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, clearing the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to bead on my forehead. My eyes darted around the room, scanning corners as if a predator might be hiding in them. No. She just asked if you were awake, and I told her you were still sleeping. I asked if she wanted me to wake you up, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said while rinsing dishes. That's it? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No. Although she looked awful, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her, Rebecca said. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little better knowing at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check the locks. I sat for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt like I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Didn't I vow to love and cherish her in sickness and in health? Clearly she was sick. If she was sick, and I really believed she was, then I had to try to get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what would I even tell them? That my wife was spying on me? That she was becoming frightening? Strange as it all was, she hadn't actually committed a crime. Not yet anyway. The police would probably just tell me I was overreacting. But this wasn't a joke. It felt wrong, even dangerous. Like something malignant was lurking beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I had the right to have her committed, but what if she just acted normal in front of them? She'd already fooled Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as doctors didn't see her as a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I had never had a good relationship. We'd never had a blowout fight or anything like that. She just wasn't a warm person, not easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips curled into a thin line, leaving her eyes as empty as before. She gave off the sort of energy that made you feel like she was always on the attack. I had only met her twice, and both times were short visits like that. My impression was that she didn't approve of me because of her daughter. Lynn was always quick to usher us out because she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, something I had been very grateful for. Being around her mother felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad we moved 3 states away so I wouldn't have to see her often. I was glad to avoid that woman altogether. But now I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all. But I had to talk to someone who understood Lynn better than I did. So I clenched my teeth and did what I had to do. "What?" she answered, sounding irritated. "Marianne, it's Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear the annoyed clicking of her tongue. "I was in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What issue do you wish to discuss, Benjamin?" she said, polite but clipped. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting very strange, and I was wondering if you knew whether there was ever any..." I was cut off immediately. "It's a little difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What exactly do you want from me?" she asked. I could practically picture her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her nails impatiently against a table. "I just wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behaviors before? Or maybe any mental health issues?" I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I couldn't tell if she was simply thinking or if it was something else. Finally, after several seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is meant to be some kind of joke, Benjamin, but if it is, I don't find it amusing. Now, I do have things to attend to, as I said, so if you'll excuse me," she said, but I interrupted before she could slip away. "Marianne, this isn't a joke. I'm genuinely worried about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very concerned for her, and I think as her mother, you should be too," I said, the frustration thick in my voice. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest involving medical professionals. I don't know what you expect of me," she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason, I was desperate to keep her on the line. I had the sense she knew more than she was letting on. "Please, if not for me, then for Lynn," I begged. I heard a faint, shaky breath, like she was struggling to hold on to her hardened demeanor, but failing. "Marianne? I began. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice is to seek professional help. Don't call here again. Goodbye." I tried to stop her, but she hung up. I sat there trying to make sense of the call and her refusal to help. Even if she disliked me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand it. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, desperate to find something I'd missed. After a while, I was about to give up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She had said it with a strange urgency. Maybe I was grasping at straws, but no, I was certain her tone had shifted when she said it, as if those words mattered. What did she mean? I assumed she meant medical professionals, but maybe she was pointing me towards someone else, someone she didn't feel comfortable naming directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a long, exhausting talk with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn genuinely needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I wasn't ready to go that deep, but I did tell them about our last encounters, how she hid in the bathroom, how she spied on me from the closet. They were clearly shocked, but luckily they believed me. They also wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was as serious as I did. Strange, yes. Dangerous, no. They kept insisting Lynn must be pulling some kind of twisted prank. Maybe for YouTube? Rebecca half-joked. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. Instead, he suggested coming with me, and I was more than willing to accept. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to persuade her to come voluntarily, was the best course of action. I agreed to do it his way. At the very least, I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning right after breakfast. No way in hell was I going at night. My stomach churned as we pulled into the driveway. Her car wasn't there, but I didn't lower my guard. The front door was cracked open, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes peering through the gap. I shivered and broke into a sweat. Chris, however, seemed fine. He waited for me to open the door, hands stuffed in his pockets like he was strolling through a park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, wrinkling his nose as he followed me inside. "What the hell do you guys use to mop your floors with around here?" Chris muttered. "Shut up," I said, eyes darting around for any sign of Lynn. The house was silent and dark, even though it was 10 in the morning. Every curtain was pulled tight, shutting out the sunlight. If I hadn't left just 2 days earlier, I would have thought the place abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking anywhere she might hide, calling her name now and then. "Why are you looking under the couch?" Chris finally asked. "Aren't we supposed to be looking for your wife?" He looked at me like I was an idiot. "Let's check upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head, but followed me up the stairs toward the bathroom and guest bedroom. On the way, my shoe crunched on glass scattered across a few steps. I noticed one of our wedding portraits on the stairway wall had been smashed. The frame hung crooked, the glass all gone. I stared at the photo, my throat tightening. We'd taken it just after leaving the church, right after our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white dress. I stared at Lynn's lovely face, never having imagined it would one day terrify me. We climbed the remaining steps and checked the guest room. It was untouched. I hesitated at the bathroom door, fear from that night rushing back into me. Chris noticed and offered to go in himself, but I couldn't let him. So we went together, checking the closet and shower. The bathroom looked like it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you grab some clothes and we'll try again tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and stepped into our bedroom, stuffing clothes into a canvas bag. When I checked inside our closet, I found the source of the smell and gagged. Chris glanced once and his face went pale. He had to step into the hall to get away from the sight and the stench. I stared in shock at what lay inside my closet. Soaking the carpet, there were at least a dozen eyeballs, all arranged carefully in pairs. Some were as big as quarters, others as small as marbles. I stared at the little eyes she had collected from small animals, wondering how she had gotten them, shuddering at the thought. Jesus, I thought Becca's shoe obsession was bad, but holy shit, your wife is in here collecting eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go. I'm gonna puke. All right, I said, grabbing my bag and slamming the closet door shut on my new nightmare. I stepped into the hall, breathing deep, but the stench clung to my tongue and I gagged again. What kind of psycho arranges eyeballs in their closet? Chris muttered. I tried to tell you she needed help, I said. She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a damn exorcist, he said. Are you coming or what? I can't stand the smell. I didn't ask why. I could feel it too. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. Slowly I turned, scanning the bedroom. Oh my God, I whispered when I finally saw what we had missed. Under the bed, lying on her side, watching us with the giddy excitement of a child on Christmas morning, was my wife. Her hands were clasped under her chin, trembling with anticipation. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the tiny sounds she was making, a hiccuping noise in her throat, like her excitement was too much for her body to contain. It was terrifying, to say the least. Her eyes were wide, her grin radiant. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I pushed it down. This was my wife. Twisted as she was still the woman I had married. I had to try to help her. Lynn, I whispered. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed side to side twice, like she was nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked, stepping forward slowly like approaching a dangerous animal. I love you, Lynn, I said softly, taking another step. She let out a small whimper from her gaping mouth, and I had to fight the urge to run. Her shoulders began to quake, her eyes bulging wide. I crouched to see her better, and that's when I saw the blood. Her hands were drenched in it. The closer I got, the more they trembled, like she could hardly control herself. Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding, I said. She shook her head again, her bloody fingers twitching up and down as if she were playing an invisible piano. Every so often they scraped against her chin, leaving smears of red across her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The stench radiating from her was overwhelming. Bile rose in my throat. Her lips were cracked and dry, thin with blood seeping from the splits. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon her in the state she was in. I inched closer and reached my hand toward her. The excited hiccuping noises grew louder, and her hands trembled, fingers curling. That's when I saw the blood seeping between them. Oh my God, Lynn. You're bleeding, I said. Instinctively, I reached to take her hand, but before I could touch her, her arm shot out toward me. A sharp pain tore through my arm, and I fell backward. My arm burned, and I could see blood dripping onto the carpet. Stunned, I looked back at her and saw her grinning manically, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. You okay in there? Chris called from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded at him, clutching my arm against my chest. When I looked back at Lynn, her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling. She was staring past me, eyes locked on Chris the way a starving lion fixes on an antelope. Her mouth was still gaping, but it had twisted into a snarl. I scrambled to my feet and started backing down the hall, terrified to take my eyes off her. You bleeding? Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn launched herself out from under the bed, shard of glass still in hand. Chris! Run! Run! I screamed. He must have been too stunned to move, because a second later I felt my back collide with him. He was still standing frozen at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn was fully out from beneath the bed now, standing in the doorway to our bedroom, her face contorted with rage. Her whole body was tense, straining. Blood streamed down her fingers and dripped onto the floor. Jesus, Lynn, Chris said. You, playing hide and seek? I reached back and shoved him toward the stairs. Move your ass, Chris, I said, as gently but firmly as I could. Lynn shook her head rapidly, sharply, and started grinning again. Her mouth stretched wider and wider until it looked like her jaw might unhinge and touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a curse and bolt down the stairs. I stood at the top step, trapped between love for a woman who clearly needed help and the instinct to protect myself. I just want to help, I said, tears in my eyes. Her gaze snapped back to me as she slowly raised the shard of glass, holding it out before her. And then she sprinted toward me, grinning with ecstatic delight. Thankfully, my body reacted on its own, and I flew down the stairs 2-3 steps at a time. I made it to the front door just as I felt her leap onto my back, her arms locking around my neck, her open mouth at my ear so I could hear those horrific hiccuping noises up close. I flung her off, throwing her to the floor. Pain shot across my back as she landed, but I had already wrenched open the front door and bolted for my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke to the police. I didn't say a word, I just sprinted to my car and jumped in. Chris understood immediately and followed. Spad, still on the line with 911. I checked the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, chasing us down. But I didn't. I drove straight to the ER, where they stitched my arm with 11 stitches and put 3 more in my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to search, but of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file for a restraining order as soon as possible, but none of that mattered. Somehow I knew it wouldn't help. I dropped Chris back at his house and drove to a hotel an hour away. I wanted as much distance between me and Lynn as possible. This is where I've been for the past 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she so desperately needed. But now I don't think so, because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. I found you. and an attached photo. It was dark and grainy, but I knew exactly what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eyes. I started typing this right after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and terrified, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And that's where tonight's nightmare ends. Or maybe it only begins once the screen goes dark. If you ever feel eyes on you when you're alone, remember this story and pray it isn't someone you love. Thank you for watching. If you survived till now, leave a like, subscribe, and join me for more tales of terror. Until next time, keep the lights on and never ignore the feeling of being watched.